Welcome, everyone, and happy Equal Pay Day. Today's Equal Pay Day. My name is Kristen Herman. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Prevention with PCADV. Today, we are very excited to host a panel with some of our colleagues and on the very important topic of pay equity. Pay equity has become a focus for PCADV and our prevention team because, as we know, economic injustices impact survivors and whole communities, and therefore pay equity for everyone, including our advocates, is an important step to prevention. Our panelists are incredible, and we know that they're not the only folks doing good pay equity work out there. So we hope to hear from others of you doing similar work. Our goal is that today's discussion will bring you insights, ideas, energy, and hope that we can get closer to pay equity for advocates. So the panelists will talk for about 40 minutes, during which time we welcome you. If you have any questions or comments, you can share them in the chat. We can't guarantee we'll get those right away, but we will try. And then for about 15 to 20 minutes at the end, we'll have open Q&A for the audience, where you can ask questions or share your comments via voice or the chat. This meeting will be recorded and shared in parts on PCADV's social media. If you do not wish to be part of the recording, you can turn off your camera, and you can also change your display name by clicking on the 3 dots in the top right of your picture. Okay, and now I will pass it over to Aishwarya.
Thank you, Kristen. And hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Aishwarya Sinha. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Senior Prevention Specialist here at PCADV. We're very excited to host this panel, and our goal is to raise awareness and offer practical tools by listening to our wonderful panelists and overall build a supportive community to contribute to the holistic recovery and independence of survivors after experiencing domestic violence. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to our panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with names, pronouns, if comfortable, role and agency. And starting right off with the first question, what got you into pay equity work? And what was the tipping point that made you decide to start exploring this topic?
So we decided that Alexandra would go first.
I wasn't sure if we were still going with that plan, but I will roll with it. So my name is Alexandra Brooks. I'm the Senior Director of Operations at Domestic Violence Services of Southwestern Pennsylvania. We cover Washington, Greene, and Fayette counties. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And when we started our pay equity work, I don't think that we were really sitting at the table saying, let's start doing some pay equity work. What we were sitting at the table saying was, what can we do that's right by our employees? And I think the tipping point for us was the COVID-19 pandemic and sort of a lot of different things that we were seeing. First and foremost, collectively as a nation, I think that we all decided that $15 was the minimum wage. People weren't willing to work anywhere under $15 an hour. And so when there are jobs out there at Target and Walmart and McDonald's where maybe it isn't quite as stressful as working at a domestic violence organization or doesn't take the skill sets that it takes to work at a DV organization, we have to really think critically about our pay rates. Turnover was also at an all-time high, and the ability to hire was at an all-time low. And so that's when we really needed to dig in to see what we could do to offer our employees better pay, better benefits, and just to be fair and equal all the way around. And I'll pass it over to Mae-Ling.
Thank you, Alexandra. My name is Mae-Ling Kranz. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the CEO of Transitions of PA. We cover Union, Snyder, and Northumberland counties. I feel like we've always been doing some level of pay equity work. We put some effort into trying to really establish very clear pay scales probably 6 years ago, and they were okay at the time, but as Alexandra said, things have changed. I agree. Even though we were doing small bits of work, the tipping point really was the COVID-19 pandemic, and it really highlighted how much work we still had to do. And if we wanted to remain open and have the type of capacity we needed to be able to provide services, we needed to make some changes. So we've been really working on that and continuing to make improvements over the last couple of years. And the other part is we know that employees feel more appreciated when there is clear work around pay equity and transparency, and happy employees turn into people who are more productive and more motivated. And so we continue to move along with that. I'll pass it to Lauren.
Thanks, Mae-Ling. My name is Lauren Edkin. I am the executive director at Sullivan County Victim Services, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. Like has been previously mentioned, I think the COVID pandemic really got us in victim services talking about pay equity. I remember sitting and listening to the PCADV COVID calls and being on the central region meetings and hearing a lot of centers talking about looking into pay equity, how to increase wages to keep employees, and struggles with turnover. So that kind of got me thinking about pay equity, which I hadn't really done much of before. So then when I kind of went back and looked at, we really hadn't had any significant changes in pay at our agency since before I had started at the agency back in 2011. We would have like small cost of living increases from time to time if that worked for the budget at the time. And I think then I kind of started looking at also feeling like I had kind of heard too many times from our board from time to time, like, well, you're doing pretty well for where we're at and where you live. So you should be happy with what you're getting. So I think with COVID, like was mentioned, other industries were increasing what they were paying their employees. And we really wanted to be able to be more fair for our employees and really be able to try to back up how much, we value the employees, their knowledge, their expertise, and what they bring to the agency, as well as wanting to keep the employees that we have and having an easier time possibly attracting someone if we needed to hire. So I think that is kind of what got me thinking about pay equity, what I was hearing from those meetings and other centers. And I'll pass it to Lori.
Thanks, Lauren. And hi, everyone. It's so nice seeing everyone just last week and now again today. So I'm Lori Sywensky. I am with Turning Point of Lehigh Valley. I'm the executive director. We cover Lehigh and Northampton. I use she, her pronouns. And so I guess, when I think about what got me interested is, I think like a lot of you probably on the call, this is a feminist movement at its core, right? So like, I think looking at gender disparity and pay equity, specifically from a gender lens, has been something that I've thought about for a long time. I took a stint off from victim services for about a decade working in community development, and in that role, spent a lot of time helping to do studies and kind of look at this region around the issues of equity and disparate income around a number of factors, including income. So it's certainly, when I came to Turning Point, something I was paying a whole lot of attention to, and knowing that, definitely as you look, certainly not just at gender, but by all sorts of demographics, a lot of people were not being provided equal opportunities in the Lehigh Valley. So it's sort of a lens I came here with. That was in 2016. So I'd say I had two main tipping points. One was starting here. And kind of recognizing it's not something that, at least for the immediate preceding years, we paid a lot of attention to. So what my clue was, two things. One, I got offered the job, recognizing as the executive director, I'm being offered more than other employees, right? And then we didn't offer benefits to family members. So I initially turned the job down because there was no way I could afford to add my kids and my husband onto the plan at full cost. And so the board had offered to pay for them. And my reply was no. I don't want something that's not available to other employees. I will accept the position if you cover half of it, but you have to offer to do that for everybody. So that was one of the things that I knew kind of we needed to balance some things and make sure, I wanted to make sure I walked the walk on it and not just improve conditions for myself, but also for them. The second thing was then, a bunch of people in boots on the ground positions coming to me in the first couple of weeks of my employment, asking me if they could discuss conflict of interest, which I found weird. And that I quickly determined was because they all wanted to know what my opinion was as the current executive director of their outside employment. And it started to become really clear that almost everybody here had to have an outside job in order to afford to work here. And we had a big turnover problem. And we had a number of employees, when I started to look into the numbers, who were qualifying and receiving public benefits in order to exist and work here. And that to me felt like a really fundamental problem that I immediately started to work on with the board of directors. And then, like other people, we made a lot of progress, and then COVID came, and then that was a whole new level of stuff. And so the board some of this stuff we even saw as aspirational. Quickly, we realized had to go from aspiration to implementation, or we were going to lose our existing workforce. So there were sort of two major points in terms of the work we've done to date. So I guess I'll stop there and we'll talk about details later.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's all amazing to hear. And I think it's a great way to start our conversation. And continuing with the tradition of letting Alexandra go first, my question to you is, you talked about your organization involving staff in pay decisions and getting feedback from them as you navigated pay equity into the organization. So how have you provided equitable compensation in benefits or other policies that were not directly related to wages and things like that?
In terms of benefits that are not directly related to wages, I think we offer a very generous PTO policy. It's a much more flexible PTO policy, paid time off, than what we've had in the past. But what I really want to talk about the most is our extended paid leave. One of the things when I started working here 10 years ago that I quickly recognized was that our sick time policy was excessive. There was a lot of sick time available, but I also knew that we didn't have any sort of policy for maternity or paternity leave. And so anytime that discussion came up, even though I am a person who does not have children, do not plan to have children, I always said, well, with the sick time, what about the people who are having children? We don't have a maternity leave plan or a paternity leave plan for those folks. So I wasn't necessarily instrumental. There were a lot of other people making those decisions, but it's something that I know is always important to me. So something that we offer our employees once they've been with us a year is our extended paid leave policy. And it's something that almost mirrors the FMLA policies, but we are a small organization. We're not required to offer FMLA. And what many people don't realize is that the Family Medical Leave Act just protects your job. It prevents your employer from firing you for having a medical emergency or needing to be out of work for 12 weeks. It does not require them to pay you. And so when we implemented our extended paid leave policy, there are a lot of different parameters that I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds on, but it is something that can be used if you do have a medical emergency that puts you out of work for weeks at a time. It's something that can be used for maternity leave. It can be used for paternity leave. It's 12 weeks and it's paid 100%. This isn't short-term disability. You can come back sooner if you're able to or you want to, but it is something that we've been able to offer our employees and offer universally to everybody, not just women or female identifying people. And so I think that's probably one of our better benefits. In terms of working with our staff to get information when we're deciding different things with the policies, I actually pulled a post-it that's been sitting on my bulletin board since last summer when I attended a prevention conference with PCADV that says, "No decision about us without us is for us." Because I do genuinely believe that. And sometimes we have to make decisions quickly as an executive team. But when we're able to take the time and ask our employees as we're implementing changes, especially around their wages and their benefits, the things that affect their livelihood, we want information from our employees. So one of the most significant changes that we've made was we increased our pay rates significantly during the COVID-19 pandemic. During that time, it was very hard to hire, and we knew we had vacant positions that we weren't confident we were going to fill. And we had employees taking on that work. They were taking on the work of whole people who were not here because we could not fill the positions. Because we weren't stabilized in terms of hiring, we put out some surveys and asked a series of questions, but one of those questions being, would you be willing to take on more work if it also meant more money in your paycheck? And the result of that, I think we had 2, maybe 3 employees who said no, but the rest of the employees all said yes. And the result of that was a $2.50 an hour raise. And we were not hiring for 4 different positions at the agency. Those positions were not eliminated. Those positions were to come back, and most of them have once we got funds stabilized. But we also didn't take away those $2.50 an hour raises that we had given to everybody. And then in terms of our benefits, it's something that we're always weighing. Insurance companies are changing prices frequently. A lot of times they're increasing it, but they're not really increasing anything that our employees are getting. And we have to decide what we want to do in terms of offering benefits, and are they paid or unpaid? Right now, our employees don't pay anything into their healthcare. But as we were considering what we needed to do in terms of the budget, we put out a survey to our staff, because we need to know what is most important to you. And if for some reason we do need to charge for healthcare, is it more important to you that you have the best plan possible and pay a minimal portion of that? Or is it more important to you that you don't pay for it and maybe we don't have the best plan possible? But anytime we're able to get our employees feedback, we really want to do that so that there's transparency across the board and so that we have informed decision-making on our end.
Awesome. I really love it. I mean, paid leave is such an important step to close the wage gap. And not only is it important for mothers, but also fathers, just to ensure that, the caregiving responsibilities are equally divided. And it really leads to less chances of domestic violence as well. So that's great. And honestly, all the increased pay rate, and that makes sense because there's more transparency and there's involvement of staff in decision making. So that really makes sense. And I know Lauren and Mae-Ling, you all 3 have all sort of done the same thing, especially with expanding benefits and looking into current benefits. So I would love to hear all of your take on this too.
Sure. I don't know. Yeah, and I think I'm taking notes as we go here too. So, but I think, yeah, some of them, and, thinking about the benefit portion, it's always a challenge. So those of you who deal with the brokers, I mean, it's a significant portion of our budget. It doesn't feel like a benefit to most people. So that is a painful one. I know one of the things we've implemented is we do make an HRA available where we are paying the first $1,000 for a single or $2,000 of employee plus dependents of deductible expenses to try and offset that. So we don't want people to avoid getting healthcare. We've tried to keep the contribution nominal. Then some of the other stuff we've done around that is also, it started, I think Nicole Molinaro, I saw is on here. I kind of stole her idea from a suggestion she made during COVID, but, went to the board for, let's move to an hour paid lunch. We did give people a half an hour previously, but we said, look, with the pandemic and all the challenges, and then at the end of it, doing the cost analysis, what are we really losing in terms of time and productivity compared to the benefit to people to just be able to handle their life's business or have enough time to actually go drive somewhere and get together with people and eat lunch. And it was such a popular thing that I think, that was a kind of a low cost way. So, we're constantly looking at that, added in, flex holidays so people can observe something they want. But I would say the biggest thing around, equitable compensation was really taking a look at our salary scale. And we did this years ago. I had to find the salary scale. For those of you, make sure you know where it is. Nobody could explain to me what was on it. And I couldn't figure out the justification, why a medical advocate was paid a little bit higher than the outreach advocate, for instance. And so we contracted it down to a really simple 4 different classifications. You were the executive that the board tells what they do. You were a manager, a supervisor, or any other direct position that interacts with the public. And so based on that, we made salary scales that were really transparent, clear. And we also went to then, we eliminated, and at least while I'm here, and people can debate it, but merit-based increases. Because again, nobody here is making like, 7 figures and getting golden parachutes, right? We're trying to get by and live. So even though we increased everyone's pay rate to at least $20 an hour, and then added in differentials for those who are willing to do the really hard work during second or third shifts when there's less managerial support, we also know that it's really hard to make decisions, and there's always some amount of implicit bias that might feed into a supervisor's decision around who gets the merit-based increases. And those people who are in front of the public doing fundraising or different things, it might be easier to recognize their contributions than maybe the third shift person who is trying to handle a crisis call, a resident in crisis, and like a clogged toilet. But I would be challenged to do counseling in that environment at this point in my life at 2 a.m. So I feel like that is something where, it's going to get a whole lot less prestige, but it's an extremely important position. And that is the face of our agency if someone's calling in. So we took away that thing. The fear is, at the end of the year, we look at the budget. What can we afford to give to everybody in terms of percentage increase? And you get it as long as you're here. And if there is an issue with your performance, we deal with that in terms of sort of our ongoing supervisory process. So I would say those are things that I think, we've gotten positive feedback over the year, that it's, definitely it's, where you stand. There's no guessing.
I'll jump in. So in addition to everything that Alexandra and Lori have said, we also knew that we needed to add some transparency to benefits. We had always given out a benefits at a glance sort of worksheet for any new hire, but it was really hard to understand what the value of the benefits were. And working in nonprofit and, we have really rich benefits here at Transitions. And so we're really fortunate. We took it a step further to try to help our employees understand what the dollar value on their benefits is. And so every year we meet with them one-on-one to go through what is their full compensation package. What are they making at an hourly rate or a salaried rate, depending on where they fall on their compensation scale? What are their benefits? What is the value there? And so they can look at those full numbers and really understand at the bottom line, where they stand and how that may compare to others. We also took the approach of deciding, just with recruiting and really the need for it, we took the approach of making our pay scale transparent. So if you go to Transitions website and there's an open position, you're able to see the entire pay scale. And that really also saved time for the approach to interviewing and hiring. And we were able to sort of screen people out quicker. Individuals who were not even interested in what we paid, certainly weren't applying, and we weren't spending that time interviewing them, going through the reference checks, only to hear, I'm not willing to accept a job for that pay rate. And so we're really transparent up front. We ask everyone about, are they willing to accept a role for that pay rate? And if they're not, we don't continue the interview and waste our time or their time. And so that's been really helpful. Beyond just the pay scale, our benefits are also public on our website, and that also has helped, with new hires for sure. And I think also, although all of our colleagues here have always had access to the information, we've just worked really hard to present it in a much more clear presentation, and so it allows them to be, allows them to fully understand what their benefits are versus having a lot of questions about how different ones work. So that's been really helpful as well.
I don't have a whole bunch to add. I'm taking notes too, because I'm always learning more and, other things to think about. Something I did think about, though, that I don't necessarily think we always think about when we're talking about benefits is retirement. So something that we were really excited to be able to implement, it was approved by our board and will start in July. But the percentage of employee contribution for our agency towards employees' retirement had been 2% forever. My coworker who's been here the longest, which is like 18 years, it was that ever since she's been here. So we don't really know how long it's been that. But we actually got that increased to 6%. So that was something that was really exciting, and something that future me and current me too is really excited about. So I think just thinking about all those different things that can be very beneficial to employees.
That's awesome. Thank you all. So, Mae-Ling, you also advocated for pay equity in front of your board of directors, and that's a huge step in itself. So, I would like to know more about your experience getting them on board, and what role did your board of directors play in making like the changes in your organization?
Sure. So like all of you, our board of directors has to go through a process of approving our budget. And so open collaborative conversations are always really important when you're talking about money and how that impacts your agency. So with my board of directors, my approach going into it, and thankfully I have an amazing team of colleagues who also worked on this project as well, we essentially did a pay audit. We took a look at where we were and tried to find discrepancies between between employees, between positions. We scaled down our scale. So again, we have like 5 levels, very much like Lori does now, because that was the question. What's the difference between somebody who's doing direct service on a hotline versus somebody who's doing direct service in-person counseling? So we scaled that down. And we also looked at discrepancies around experience versus education, and really where that had sort of become an issue around wage compression. People who had been with us longer may have been paid less, not for intentional purposes, for discriminatory reasons, just as time has passed, the negotiations around what will someone be willing to accept a position for has changed. And so we really took a look at that. We right-sized and made sure that our current employees had the opportunity to get their salaries addressed first before sort of moving on and filling those vacancies. But in terms of working with my board of directors, I worked really closely with my finance department, or my finance committee, to talk about what were our organizational assets, our liquidity, where were our grants coming from, how much could we afford? And I also talked with our personnel committee and really reviewed sort of the landscape of what was happening and the struggles around keeping employees and hiring new employees, and what that looked like. And so, some research going into it, presenting some data to them to help them understand where we were as an organization versus, in our local community or in our region, what others were paying or what benefits existed. And it took a little while for us to really talk through why we needed to get to where we are now. I thankfully have an amazing board of directors. They're very supportive and collaborative, and although there were questions in the process, one always being, do we have enough money? How do we pay for all of this? At the end of the day, they voted to make the decision and support what our ask was, which was huge. And so when we presented it to staff, we also helped them understand that it wasn't just our leadership or our management team, consciously making this decision. Our board of directors was behind it and supported it as well.
That's awesome. Getting leadership on board is really important to strategize and start seeing changes. Does anyone else want to chime in?
So I would actually like to, so I'll say board involvement is super important. And in fact, I even noticed, because I thought it was important, like if you were able to push this out to your board, and I see I have at least one board member here from my board, and I think, making sure they understand this stuff. If you're the one who knows it and they're not quite seeing it from your perspective, what can you do to increase that? I would say, the first big push was with a board that was really worried about maintaining our reserve. And at that point, we were in a pretty fiscally decent position, not for any good reasons. What we had done historically was when we lost positions, we just cut by rescission, not for any strategic reason, and that we made a lot of positions part-time and saved money on benefits. So there was like a whole effort to restore capacity and look at needs. But then I started mapping out salaries against HUD 80% area median income. Those of you who do housing, we started to look at sort of like where do different positions fall. And so I would give them a dashboard going back to like 2017, 18 of until we have people who are above 80% AMI, like we have no room to like pat ourselves on the back. So we finally made that threshold, and that was getting everyone up to a minimum of about $16 an hour. So I think that was one way to present data. We also would compare things to like our workforce investment board data, which they put out a report, at least here in the Lehigh Valley. You can check your own local. It's tied in with like the CareerLink system. But they put out a salary study. So I would map then also like what is an equivalency to the positions we have here? It's not apples to apples, but close. And kind of look at, okay, if people are getting jobs in other nonprofits or private sector, what's the comparable? So I would provide them those two data points. And like, even if we were close on WIB, if we still have people who are qualifying for benefits, we have not anywhere met our threshold of what we need to do in terms of investment. The COVID thing that was interesting was a little flips on that. We knew we had a problem. We were losing a lot, especially our second and third shift positions. And they were always traditionally hard to fill. And so that's when we, went and I had presented a similar sort of data point, right? Like gave them all the mapping out, and here's what people make, and here's our comparables, and here's what you can make if you Amazon and all the warehouses moving in were advertising at that point like 18 or 19 bucks an hour, and we were starting people less than that. And the advertising, like, no GED needed, like, and I'm like, okay, mentally that's a strain on you, right? And you feel devalued seeing that. So I went in all prepared and pitched an $18 an hour new minimum, and with the shift differentials and sign-on bonuses and a lot of things to try in addition to the other benefits. And honestly, it was by that point, I realized a new tipping point where I had a couple of board members who come from the private sector and industry. And I had also prepared an analysis of like, okay, here's the insane version of if we made everyone 20 bucks an hour, and it would put us about $200,000 further in debt based on projections at that point in time. And they're like, look, if we're going to do it, go for it. They're like, why come back and always be like, today you're going to say 18 and the next year you're going to come back. And I honestly had tons of agita and anxiety. Like by the next day, I was like, okay, how do I get around this? Because we can't afford it. What I will say was their confidence and their belief in our employees was very helpful, and their commitment to kind of help support through fundraising and other stuff. The other thing was that what proved to be successful, it was also like a selling point to funders to talk about not just our investment in our clients, but to our staff. I will say that within a month, I had all of those positions filled, and all of those people that we hired are still with us 2.5 years later. So definitely it was worth it in terms of investment. So yeah, but definitely that partnership with the board, and at times it's been interesting that we play different roles in there. And at times I thought they were being a little bit more generous than I thought was comfortable, but it's worked out.
Just like everybody else is saying, I mean, we obviously have to work with our board on it, but one of the functions of the board is to help us with fundraising. And so I know in the most recent fiscal year when we discussed raises, because the way that we determine raises outside of the merit-based increase is we look at the Bear Center Wage and Benefit Survey that comes out, I believe, every other year. And so that's something that really helps us determine if our employees are making what they should be making. And it sounds like other areas of the state have something very similar that we all use as a good barometer for where we're at. And so in order to be able to give our employees the raises that they were expecting based on their performance, but also give them a raise to ensure that they were making what they should be making for their roles, because something that we do is if we increase the hiring rate, the employees who are in those positions also get that increase so that we don't have an imbalance 5-10 years down the road. We worked with our board to see if they were willing, and they certainly were, to bring in $10,000 to $15,000 each. And so that doesn't mean that each board member is cutting a check for $10,000 to $15,000, but they may be going out and planning a fundraiser that might raise $10,000 or $15,000. They may go out after funding to support our organization, or maybe they have 10 or 15 friends who could each donate $1,000. And so it wasn't just a commitment to make it happen with the budget, but also to have some skin in the game with that too.
And then I'll just chime in that when I was approaching our board about increasing wages, it was very helpful to have transitions resources. Mae-Ling had shared the transition salary scale and what their benefits were at that time. So that was hugely helpful for me when approaching our board with the, hey, can we look into this? Can we work on this?
Awesome to hear. And I know, Lori, you started talking about this, but what would your best recommendation be for program leaders who want to start this process? And do you have like any resources that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think, you know, in looking at it, I mean, I think the first thing is just even sometimes the psychological hurdle of it. You know, it's like when you're looking at your budgets and you're like, okay, there's VOCA cuts and this funder's gone down, and, you know, but it's sort of, you know, so I think in pulling data, that's always been helpful for me. So I referenced some of them. Again, just pulling some of the stuff like that HUD has available in terms of some of those gauges, just to reality check yourself. Like, what are people making? Looking at talking, you know, I like the suggestions here of going out to your staff. What are comparable positions paying, not just in sister agencies in adjacent counties, but also in, you know, other sort of nonprofits. And taking that to your board, because I think there also is a really good business model. And that's why I pulled in the Workforce Investment Board data to look at sort of what is the cost of not solving this or not paying people more. So for, you know, if you're giving everybody across the board an additional $1 per hour and they're full-time, I mean, that may be an additional $2,000 a year plus whatever increase in payroll taxes and whatever. But what are the costs if you don't keep people happy and retain them? And you're paying for the turnover and the losses and then the burnout it's causing on other staff. So I think, you know, and we focused on if we're able to sort of invest in the employees in that way, and they are the biggest part of our budget, right? Like, I don't know, ours is about 75% of our budget is spent on people. So it seems like we really want to cultivate that investment. I mean, you know, to say it in sort of a very inhuman way. But the reality is, like, if we're not happy here, we're not going to do a good job and it's going to cost us. So I think that's, you know, being able to pull together the data and also, you know, going in with the idea that you have to be able to kind of justify any of those differences that you do have. So, you know, if you're going to continue with those pay scales that you don't quite understand, like, can you comfortably, and that's been our gauge here as management at Turning Point, is to kind of like, when we send it out in an email, are we comfortable with our decisions? Because if we feel like we have to kind of like be secret about what people make or why this position makes this or that, then we're probably doing something wrong. You know, so I think it's just some of that internal work to kind of get you prepared. And understanding it will probably pay you dividends and make your life easier if you start to improve some of these things, even if there's some short-term cost involved in it.
Yes, and having that understanding really is important. And now my next question is for Lauren. So your agency is a smaller one with less staff. Do you have any specific advice for smaller size programs or for rural programs who want to get started with the pay equity steps at their organization?
So we are a small agency. There's 5 of us at the office. Something that was very helpful for us and could help kind of fill in gaps that there might be when increasing pay for employees would be, we do a ton of prevention at our agency. Prevention is just so valuable and important to our agency. So we were kind of looking at areas where did we maybe kind of partner with other agencies or collaborate with other organizations in our county that might be reimbursing for prevention that we do. So like some examples that I have of things that we're doing now is our county received opiate settlement funds. So we receive a portion of opiate settlement funds that we can do opiate prevention programs in our school district. We receive some drug and alcohol funding through our single county authority. So we do some drug and alcohol programming that we get reimbursed for. With our children and youth in Sullivan County, we get reimbursed for community child abuse prevention education. So, we're doing all kinds of different prevention programming that covers risk and protective factors, social emotional learning, drug and alcohol prevention, and then as well as domestic violence prevention, sexual violence prevention, but kind of seeing where could we work with individuals in our community that support our work, and if they were already supporting our work, if it wasn't totally covering the amount of a program, could we ask for possibly more? And so far that's worked for us very well, and it's been helpful to be able to support increasing wages for employees. So I think not everyone will have the same experience with prevention, but what are things that are working well in your agency? What do you focus on? Where can you look for organizations and partnerships to partner with to kind of help support your agency and your work?
Wonderful. Thank you, Lauren. Those are really good tips. Thank you to all of our panelists so far. I think we've all been taking notes, even those of us on the panel. So we'd like to take this last 10-15 minutes to open it up for questions. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or if you could raise your hand. If you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, there should be a reactions button. And if you click on that, you'll see a couple of icons and then a raise hand button. So please feel free to raise your hand or put your questions in the chat for the panelists.
So while we wait, can I just add, excuse me, 2 more low-cost things that we've talked about as, made quick notes. I had to put a little quick plug here on professional development opportunities, because I think that when you're talking about, if you look at sort of motivations for work and nonprofits, money is not the top motivator, but professional development is. So that's another low-cost thing. I know we built in sort of a leveled system in our job descriptions to provide people in a smaller agency opportunities to increase their skills if that's what they want to do, and then be compensated for it. But the other thing is thinking about participation in committees and caucuses. So I know we just had the discussion about that, but having people have those opportunities to gain their skills, to get out and network, even if you're in a place right now where you're like, I'd like to raise wages, but I don't think I can, what are some additional value adds or benefits that you could offer your employees? So I just wanted to kind of put that out there, and also mention, if you are offering things, one of the big things here was make sure it's available to everybody. So often, even our well-intentioned board, don't listen, Sean, is, sometimes suggest things like, let's have a luncheon. But I'm like, well, what does that mean for people who can't come into the office? They work in the court or they work third shift. So always, sort of pushing back as an executive, let's make sure we can offer something equitably to everybody, and not just make sure that things feel like they're a benefit only to those who sort of have those more privileged positions of working Monday to Friday type of thing. So just 2 things to throw out there quick.
Thank you, Lori. And we have heard that question more often, especially when we do our trainings, like what can programs do if they don't have funding, or what are some like low-cost ideas or creative sources. So thank you for giving that insight. And I would love to hear from the other panelists too, if they have some tips for us.
I can't remember who mentioned the paid lunch breaks at the rate that they are, but that's one benefit that I always make sure I go over really well in the interviews, just because I know that so many lunch breaks are unpaid at so many workplaces, or like they said, it's not enough time to really get anything done other than eat your food. And for folks who are working during the day, it doesn't really give you a chance to live your life in the way that you might need to do that and to take care of personal business. So that's something that we offer. And we also, I mean, this may not so much be health or pay equity, but we do a lot around culture at the agency. We do have software called Bamboo HR that allows us to survey our employees, and it allows us to do it in a way that is truly anonymous. So even the administrator does not have access to who answered what question. And if we wanted to break it out by categories, we have to have a certain number of employees who answer a question in a different group. So if we wanted to see our employees from the ages of 18 to 22, but only one of 3 of those employees answered the survey, we're not going to get those results because it would not make it anonymous at that point. And we've really been able to use those results to make changes within the organization and ensure that we have a work culture that everybody really wants to be a part of and that people look forward to coming to every day.
That's
Great.
awesome. Mae-Ling, Lauren, any tips?
Again, I don't know, there is some obviously tie to pay equity with this. But coming off of the pandemic, after all of us had to sort of be remote for a period of time, I'm not sure which one of you said this, but things that we'd been talking about for years, we were forced to really embrace immediately. And one of those was sort of more flexible work schedules and figuring out when staff could do their jobs in a way that was remote and allow them more flexibility in that way. And that has really helped as well. We recognize there are things that our employees, if you have an entire day full of Zoom meetings, you don't necessarily need to be in the office and can save, on gas and time getting ready in the morning. Or if today's your day that you have to enter and check ETO, again, it's a computer day, and do you really need to be in the office to do that? And also just really being flexible and respectful and thoughtful about our employees who do need flexibility for a variety of things. We really sort of coming off of the pandemic, really tried to reinforce the culture of taking sick time to take care of yourself, being something we wanted our employees to do. We want people to not feel bad about taking a day off because they need a mental health break versus I'm sick and I have the flu and I'm running a fever. And really are reinforcing that piece of it as well. And that has helped, I think, across many areas of, just helping our team, be as productive and as healthy and feel as supportive as possible. We also picked up Bamboo HR and recently added Headspace. We received a small workplace grant for healthy workplace grant. And so are doing a trial run on Headspace as a way for employees to take some time and, to be able to think about, meditating or taking a few breaths or, preparing for their day in a different way. And so those are small things that we've done as well.
Thank you.
I don't think I'm really
go
adding
ahead, Lauren.
anything that hasn't been said, but I just will echo kind of what Mae-Ling said about encouraging staff to use their time off. I know even myself, sometimes it's like, how am I going to use this time? Like I have so much to do. There's not enough hours in the day, days in the month, but really focusing and emphasizing the importance of using it. And I was just writing some more notes because today's the first I've heard of the Bamboo HR, so I'll look into that.
Me too, right? So, well, I mean, to echo real quick, I mean, I was joking with Alexandra in the beginning, how I throw out random percentages and mean nothing all the time. But, our mantra is like, are you 90% today? And again, like, show up. Survivors deserve to have you at least 90% functional. And if you're not, like, let's talk about should you go home? And we do offer 4 personal days and then, medical time as well. So, I do see there are a few questions in the chat. I'll just say we got rid of the degree things. Like if you still have that, really question that. So, this is a grassroots empowerment movement. We do not hire any attorneys or therapists who would be required by licensure to have certain degrees. We have found that there were people, and I will say personally, when I looked at the people who had been with the organization for a long time and were making little money and had not progressed, they were disproportionately women of color, which really bothered me. And we looked at what was keeping them from the opportunities. And a lot of times it was they had made progress on a degree, but had not actually graduated. But they were seen as a go-to, and they were training people who were coming in with degrees. And so if you have that dynamic going on in your organization, you should really question, in a peer-based grassroots empowerment sort of organization, is that degree necessary? So, we got rid of that and traded it where, for us, the preferred quality for candidates is that they are bilingual in at least English and Spanish.
Thank you, Lori. Anyone else, quick thoughts on that question, which was hearing the thought on shift differentials and base pays. What are your thoughts on pay difference between staff that have high school diplomas versus staff that have college degrees but are doing the same job? Any quick thoughts? And then we do have 2 other questions.
So this is really an answer for Carrie. Again, if you want to go to Transition's website, you can pull our pay scale there just to take a look at it. I would really encourage you to think about, pulling some local data though, because, even I can tell you that Lori and I've had this conversation, we're a little different than they are. And, it's about 2-hour drive between us and them. And so keep that in mind as you take a look at it. But our stuff is out there, and so you're welcome to use that and ask questions if you have any. We also took away the requirements related to degrees versus just experience. I often think sometimes the best approach to hiring is someone who has the right kind of personality and disposition. I sometimes jokingly say, people who have amazing customer service skills are really the people that make the best advocates, because they're very kind and supportive and have that mindset of wanting to help. We do have a few positions in our organization that require those degrees: a therapist, an attorney. But yeah, we really got away from that as well, just to make things more equitable, because we had people that had been with us for 20 years and didn't have a degree, but really needed to have equal pay for sure. We did also build in some retention bonuses for our staff at 5-year markers. We also built in some sign-on bonuses, and the way that we looked and were able to sort of argue that is, the longer your position sits open, you're paying less in salary, you're paying less in benefits. And so by the time you fill that position, if you're just, looking at that as sort of a potential trade-off, it does recruit a different group of individuals for sure.
Thanks, Mae-Ling. Thanks everyone for addressing some of the extra questions. Panelists, if you have any templates or pay scales you've used, if you could put them in the chat for folks. And then panelists, the last question that Mae-Ling touched on a little bit is, does anyone offer any perks by the amount of years someone is at the agency, for raises or other types of benefits, or do you keep it the same across the board?
I mean, we have, similar to Mae-Ling, there are bonuses offered, like a monetary bonus at different milestones. And we did recently increase those because we're like, oh, it doesn't even feel like a bonus at all anymore. So we did that. Generally, we don't do bonuses unless we're able to do it across the board for everybody. So, there was 1 year with VOCA funding being a much different environment. We were able to do that. But yeah, and I think in general, though, we have not, I will say one of the things we're talking about potentially is building in that, you have to be here for at least so many months before you qualify for that year-end cost of living increase. Because somebody who's starting in May, and we do the COLAs typically for the start of the new fiscal year, there's been some discussion about the fairness of that. But otherwise, no, we don't do anything like that.
Maggie Mae-Ling asked if you'd be willing to share a sample benefits explanation document.
I believe that's also on our website, but if it is not, Maggie, just send me an email and I'll make sure I get it off to you. We're always happy to share things like that, because why not help each other out? I think the only difference for us in terms of longevity with the organization is our vacation time. So our PTO time is split out. We have everybody receives 2 weeks of sick time. Everyone starts out with 15 vacation days, 3 personal days. We have 12 paid holidays. A handful of those are floaters. International Women's Day, I heard some of my colleagues talking about it's a day off. We make that one a floater. You get your birthday off if you want it. So, we've built in some of those things that those really are, I would say, although there is a value on that financially, those are easy things to build in and make an argument for in a way to support your entire organization.
And I see that as a question in the chat. And so I can at least speak for DVSSP that, yes, we do offer PTO. And in addition to that, we have the sick time. And in addition to that, we have the extended paid leave plan. Not to mention, we also, if you're called to jury duty, they give you like $5 to be there for the entire day. And so we will, if you can provide receipt that you were at jury duty, we'll pay you for the day, for the time that you needed to be there. We offer up to 3 days of bereavement per family member. We've got a list that's pretty specific in our handbook, but there's no limit on that. So that's all in addition to our paid time off. And we've lumped our vacation and our holidays all into PTO just because some of those holidays were sort of flexible, like some folks are talking about. And we were only offering, I believe, 2 personal days a year. And so depending on what holidays you celebrate or what time of the year you were hired, it might be difficult to get the days off that you want to. So we said, we're just going to wrap it all into one. It's PTO. That's going to cover your vacation, your holidays, and your personal days. And then we'll add on the sick and all of those other paid benefits.
So one thing it makes me think of as we say this, we're talking about what we give people. I will say some of this stuff that we also took away. So here's where I was the killer of birthdays, because we found there was like sort of an equity issue with that in the organization. And a lot of times employees feeling pressure to help contribute for other employees or for their managers in cases. And some people don't like to celebrate their birthday or it's against their beliefs. So we kind of said, look, you can bring in something to celebrate your own birthday and share it with people, but we'll celebrate your work anniversary. So I'd say that's one of the things that, like, as we talk about, and also I know some people do sick banks or allow for that. It's something else that we did take away as an option, only because we found that it was often, again, a similar dynamic where certain people were sort of consistently asking for donations of their medical time off. And some people were feeling sort of an implicit pressure to do that. And it was coming up again. And sometimes it was coming up in their unemployment proceedings. So at the point where, like, there was something where they were really disgruntled or they ended up having work injuries that turned into workers' comp claims. And, so it was over the course of having to resolve some things in the first year or two after getting here that we decided, they sound great, but in practice, they were definitely causing a little bit of feelings of inequity within the workplace. So something to think about. How are you applying these things?
Thanks, everyone. So we're about 2 minutes out. I'll see if we have time for this one last question that came in from Allison. We took away the requirement for a degree for many positions, but most staff that we hire in those positions do have degrees and have noted they feel like it's not necessarily fair to get paid the same as someone without a degree. Any thoughts on this?
Maybe it's not the right place for them. I mean, it's honestly, we have to untrain therapists sometimes. So people who come in with a degree and we have to ask them to not practice therapy. And again, it's a different line of work. And I say that half joking. I mean, I know many people here have degrees. We've worked hard. But again, you come into this knowing that we value people's lived experience. I think that's one of the things we really prioritize. We do advertise for a lot of positions asking for people with customer service experience. So they love that you said that. But again, I appreciate that this is maybe economically not viable for them. And so maybe this is not going to be the right career for them. But again, I think, being really firm in your beliefs on it is, being able to be comfortable in it. But no, we wouldn't compensate more for a degree.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you to our audience for your questions. excuse me, this panel has been recorded, so we should be able to share out the recording and also hopefully recap some of the amazing tips that we learned. Thank you so much. Round of applause to our panelists. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your lessons learned. Let's see what else. Another thing to look out for, since this is Equal Pay Day, are some more of PCADV's pay equity, fact sheets and reports coming out. And also we are analyzing the salary study that you all participated in. We got over 800 responses, which is incredible. So thank you all for attending, and hopefully this is just the first of many conversations about pay equity.